Okay, right. So today's Clay Club session is about building with slabs, and the idea is that whereas the previous session that we did with slabs, we just looked at making tiles, this time we're going to build something three-dimensional. So what I suggested earlier in the week was that you slabbed your clay already, and therefore the clay is dried a little bit and it's just a little bit stiffer, which means that it's easier to work with and it will hold a structure without collapsing better. If you haven't done that, I'll briefly demonstrate how to roll out some clay as well, and I'll show you the difference between completely plastic wet clay that's just come out of the bag and clay that's more like leather hard, the mystical magical leather hard that I talk about quite a lot. And then the third thing, or the second thing that I've suggested you need, is just a piece of cardboard. So this is basically a bit of cereal packet. So cereal packet cardboard, again, it's like I always try and do, something that everybody's got. It's quite flimsy, which means it won't last long, but because it's printed on one side, that gives it a certain amount of water resistance, okay? And what I will get you to do is cut out a shape that you can use as a template. And the idea is that we're going to cut out a series of objects, this kind of shape, and connect them together and try and build something, see where it goes, okay? So it might be a complete disaster, but hopefully it won't. Right, so first thing, let me just kind of demonstrate how to roll out the clay. For those of you that haven't been able to do it, that would be a good start. So you're going to need either a cheese wire or rolling pin and 2 guide sticks. And these are the guide sticks that I've got, and they're about 7mm thick, which isn't great. Something more like 10mm or a centimetre would be better, but this will work. And then you need a rolling pin. And what you do is the following. So I'm going to make a line, so as a slab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically shape a coil. You don't need to do this. I just want to demonstrate it, just so that those of us that haven't got going, when they watch this, can see it. And then you basically put the guide sticks either side. The guide sticks need to be the same thickness, or they're not going to work. You put them one either side, and then you roll along the clay. In fact, I'm going to turn it away from you. This is always the best way to do it. Have it facing away from you. And the trick is, you can do it on newspaper, or you can do it on a surface that's waterproof, like this is oilcloth. You roll it a bit, and then you turn it. And like we did with the slabs before, when we made the tiles, normally you would roll it one way, turn it and 90 degrees, and roll it, turn it and 90 degrees. I'm just making a long one, so I'm only going to turn it over. And the reason that you turn it over very regularly is that otherwise it sticks to the surface. And if you've got newspaper, it sticks to the newspaper, and then the newspaper tears, and it's a bit of a faff. It can be done, but it takes quite a long time to pick the newspaper out. Okay. Now, I saw an amazing video of a traditional Chinese teapot maker making a traditional Chinese, one of these miniature Yixing Chinese teapots, and he made it entirely, even though it was a kind of a donut shape, he made it entirely from slabs of clay. So he made a base piece that was round, and then he made a wall like this, and he attached it to itself onto the base piece, and then on a little circular plinth, he just kind of pressed it into shape, and before you knew it, had made a miniature teapot. So it is quite a versatile process. So there we go. The other thing you might find is you might get some air bubbles in this. Let's have a look. Yeah, there's one there. So if you've got a knife, anything sharp, a pin will do. If I press on that, it's like a blister. Just need to prick it and then squeeze the air out of it, and that should get rid of it. Okay. So if you haven't made any slabs, that's an easy way to do it. The best way is to take a ball of clay and flatten it out. Here's one I started on earlier. And as I was saying before, you roll it, turn it, twist it 90 degrees, keep going. Okay, that's it in one move. I've got a lot of slabs here, so I could make something quite enormous, really. That's got quite a lot of bits of air in it. So this is old clay, the clay that I was giving out for free. And you can see, particularly when you slab it, this is when you really notice the air bubbles. So yeah, you can see that one there. So you just need to prick them out to get rid of them. Push the air out of the way. Not completely infallible, but generally it works quite well. There's a bit of clay with newspaper stuck in it there, so the newspaper will just burn out in the kiln, but it might leave a kind of slight stain. So that is clay straight out of the bag. So you can see it is extremely floppy, and that means that when you build with it, it's going to bend and collapse really easily. So that's not great. So the reason I was suggesting that you either did your clay yesterday or even this morning was you will get clay that's a bit stiffer. So this is a bigger piece. It's still flexible, but I can feel, you might not see it because it's bigger, but I can feel that it is stiffer and harder. So that's quite good. This piece I made a couple of days ago, and you can see really clearly that that is now actually quite stiff. If I bend that any more, that's going to snap. So this is what's called leather hard clay. Okay, and leather hard is a really important state because I can touch the surface of the clay and it won't pick up my fingerprints. I can kind of very slightly scratch it with a fingernail, whereas with this other stuff, I touch it with the surface of my fingernail, it makes massive dents. So the leather hard clay is a lot stiffer. It's got some flexibility, which means you can build with it, but it doesn't pick up every mark that you accidentally create by touching it. It's only going to pick up marks that you intend to put into it. Okay, so the leather hard is good. Now, the other thing that we're going to need today is a bit of slip. And I think we've done slip before. We need to make a little slip pot. So to make a slip pot, you need a little lump of clay and some water and maybe a paintbrush. I'm not sure I've got. I can use something else. And you're just going to make a tiny little indentation. So you're making a kind of very rough pinch pot. And you're going to put some liquid in it. And then you are going to mix it until you've got slip. So I'm just going to stop whilst we do that and let everybody catch up with that bit. Okay, so I'm just going to pause now. Okay, so I've made some slip. So simple pinch pot. Helps if the walls are quite thick so you can't wear through them. I've put in about ½ centimetre of water in the bottom and I've just stirred it in. And it should be, people say, like double cream. So basically it's not going to drip off the brush. So it's quite thick. And in actual fact, I shouldn't call this slip, I should call it slurry. But as anybody who's English will know, slurry is also the name for the stuff that farmers spread on their fields that smells rather bad. Slip properly is the name given to liquid clay that has a colour added to it. So you can get black, white, grey, red, kind of a range of quite simple colours. And they're different to glazes, to underglaze colours, because you can apply them earlier and mix them into the clay. So we'll call it slip just because it's easier to remember. So there it is. So I'm going to put that to one side. Let's just raise this up a bit. Make sure you can see everything. Oop. So the other thing I've made is a template shape. And it's, you can see it's about the size centimeters across. And I've just made something, I think that's a trapezoid. So it's rectangular with one slightly diagonal side. It's either a trapezoid or a rhomboid. Not that it really matters. And I'm going to use that as my unit of construction. So the reason that I thought this would be a good idea is it just gives us something to work with, so we can start building something, and it gives us a unit. And because it's got odd sides, there are various different ways we can add the pieces together, which provides a bit of variety and a bit of chance, but it gives us something that's going to help generate the form, so we don't need to know what we're going to build. Okay, so my first step is I'm going to make a series of cutouts using this template. So probably best to use the printed side first. I want to try and get as many as possible out of my piece of clay. So I'm just going to try and mark around it before I cut it, just to see how many I can get. I should be able to get 4 out of this piece, I think. And obviously you can cut them out. The clay is quite damp. You could cut them out and then let them rest, because obviously they'll have slightly more surface area if they're cut out. And so they will dry a bit quicker. But you could also then reball the leftover clay carefully and roller it out. And then you've got more to cut out from. Right, I've just about got 4 pieces out of that one. Tiny little dint on that corner where it's not quite worked. The other way I could do it is maybe if I turn it over, I do 2 along the bottom, possibly. I might get more out if I do a couple like that, and then a couple upright. It's just nice not to have a little corner missing. You want exact shaped pieces, so it looks, it's got that professional finish to it. So yeah, I'm going to space them out. However I do it, I'm just going to lose a little bit of a corner by the looks of it. So just not going to quite pull it off the way that I hoped. That will be okay. So I'm going to cut these out. So I've got a knife to cut out with. Now, if you haven't got any clay tools, probably a flat-bladed kitchen knife would be the best thing to do. Or if you've got clay tools and you've got the wooden ones, a wooden knife is probably quite a good thing. The wooden clay tools are quite thick, so the body of them is quite thick, but the head is only 1 millimeter or 2 thick. So it's up to you whether you want to use a knife, depending on who you're working with. If you've got younger kids, give them the wooden tools. Always good. And then something to cut out around. Now, I'm not going to cut out around my cardboard template because that's going to stress it and damage the edge. So I'm going to use a ruler, having drawn out the shapes. And I've got an old architect's scale ruler that I'm using because it's plastic. And I want to keep my knife, whatever it is, nice and vertical when I'm cutting. These knives, if you've got one of them in your clay kit, they're very sharp. So just be very careful of the point. It's very easy to prick yourself with it. And I don't want to cut it out in one go. And certainly if you've got clay that is leather hard, you will find it's a lot tougher going. So I'm going to cut it out in 3 or 4 cuts. So I'm going to cut out one, and then I'm going to stop recording and cut out the rest, because you really don't need to see me doing all this cutting out. So in a minute, you'll be able to stop the recording and just set up all of your slabs as well. And I'm probably going to cut out about 12 so I can build something quite large. So there's my first one. It's got nice sharp edges. One side has got the lines on it that I didn't want to use. Just going to smooth out the sides of it. The other side's nice and clear. So I'm just going to make a whole load of these. All right, so I'm going to stop recording again and let you make a load. I would aim to make 8 or more each. Okay, if you make 4, you can make, well, you'd need to make a cube, you'd need 6. Okay, so that gives you some idea of how many to do. I'm going to make something quite complicated, so I'm going to try and make 8. We'll pick up in a minute. Great, so I've made my collection of slabs, of pieces, and some of them are made out of the soft clay, so they're quite flexible. Some of them are made out of the harder clay, which is a bit stiffer. Generally, I think I've obviously not used the same guide. Some of them are thicker than others, or some of them are just, yeah, I just haven't cut that one as well, have I? You can see this one's a lot thicker than this one. It's not a major issue. As I go, I'm just going to try and smooth the surface. But what I'm basically going to do is start to construct them by building a series of walls and sections. So the reason that I made my template uneven is that it throws a complication into the design. If I'd have made it as a square or a rectangle, it would have repeated really regularly, and that's all right. But I think if there's a kind of slight anomaly in the form, and in this case it's this slightly diagonal edge, or diagonal edge, it's going to force me to be a bit more creative about how I put it together. So we're going to basically join edges with slip and sgraffito. So you want to kind of think about which edge is built against which other edge. So if I've got this as a base, let's say, I might want to build the other pieces on top of it so that the base supports all of the upright pieces. I could put it on the side, and that would give me a slightly different shape. But I'm going to see how I get on. And I might even kind of mix it up a bit, because obviously I'm going to start getting things that, as you can see here, see if you can see that better. Oh, come over, camera. Yeah, I'm going to get slightly uneven sides. So I could get around the fact that the thickness, when I place bits on top of each other, is going to move everything slightly out of line. I could get around that by cutting diagonally through the corners. So I could create 2 corners that actually butt up to each other accurately, but that's quite tricky to do. I'll show you if you want to be a perfectionist. So what I'm basically thinking is the thickness of the clay is going to add to the length of the sides. So you're effectively going to have things that aren't quite even. Okay. The way that you could get around that is to cut at a diagonal through the sides. Now, you'd have to do it to both pieces, and it is a bit of a faff. So certainly for the younger members of Clay Club, that's going to be quite hard to do, and they're going to need a bit of help. But if I do 2, you'll see the difference, and you'll see what I mean. So I'm cutting at a 45-degree angle as much as I can. I'm going to do that one because it's a nice solid one. Let's do this one. It's soft, easier to cut. And when I put 2 45-degree angles together, I get a 90-degree right angle again, which is what I want. So I can either join two bits by butting them up to make a butt joint, as they call it in woodwork. But that means that the thickness, now this wall length here, instead of it being the length of the piece, it's the length of the piece plus the thickness. So it's going to slightly distort the measurements. Instead of that, I've cut this piece and this piece at a slight angle. Let's just trim that one at the top a bit. So I've cut the thickness out of the ends. So now when I butt them together, it keeps the same height. Yeah. So the difference is here and here, I have to butt them up one against the other. Here and here, where I've cut the angle into it, I can keep the same dimensions. The benefit of keeping the same dimensions is if you want to build something upwards, like here, and use that as a base, you've got the same sides. Okay, it's quite complicated to do, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to see what happens if I just work with the pieces, which is what the younger members are going to do. And those of you that don't get my very poor explanation, you're going to do it as well. So I've got my various bits, and as I build them up, as I've been saying, I'm going to get a slight inconsistency in the widths and the heights, but I could start building all kinds of weird and wonderful things. Let's just try and get this on an angle so you can see it a bit better. Yeah. Okay, so there's a base piece, there's a wall. I can keep that width. I can keep that width because there's a gap there. I could then chuck a bit over that way. I could chuck a bit over that way. I could even put it on there and start to make something quite interesting out of the sections of clay. And it will suggest ways that it can build itself. So I could line some bits up to start creating an angle. Okay. I might start. In fact, I might even go with all of it on an angle. I might kind of put the angled edge on the floor, and then I start to create a kind of zigzag form. I might put my base piece on the top. So I could start to create something that's quite odd. So I'm just laying them against each other at the moment, so they're not going to stick together. What I need to do is use my slip and my sgraffito technique to get good joins. So I've got my slip over here that I've already prepared. I'm going to try and just smooth off the surface of the clay before I join it, because once I start joining things together, I can't really get in and smooth things as easily. There's a little bit of newspaper that I want to dig out. I'm going to check both sides because obviously both sides might be seen. The leather hard clay you could inscribe into afterwards. But I think my leather hard clay is a bit too hard to put a stamp design onto. But what I'm going to suggest is that maybe we could cut bits through later on so we can create piercings through the clay. All right, so I'm going to start off with a leaning shape. So I quite like that form. I'm just going to work out what the best way is to lean it. And of course, if I stood this up the other way, it's at a right angle. So actually, it's not a leaning form. It's just a right angle form. So depending on which way up you put your pieces, you might get a different result. So I like what that's doing. So I've got my 3 pieces. I'm going to just let them flop over, and then I'm going to join the edges. Now, if you just join it with slip, it won't make much of a difference. Okay, you've really got to do some sgraffito. And I'm using a knife at the moment. You could do it actually quite happily with a sharp pencil. You're not going particularly deep. The whole idea is that you're breaking up the surface with your pencil marks, and you're going to do it on both surfaces that you're going to join. And the point is that you're making the surface area greater. So instead of it being a straight line, it's broken up. And that means that the slip that you apply, the liquid clay, can sit into those All right, how are we doing, gents? Is it working okay? I know you've got slightly damper clay than me, so it might not be.
Yeah, this clay is quite soft, so it's taking fingerprints all over the place. But
okay, well, as long as you can get it to join, that's the more important thing. The fingerprints you can always rub out later on.
Yeah, so I think I've managed to like join up, and look, this is my
wow, great.
wow.
Excellent. Yeah.
But I think next time I won't make the clay so thick.
Yeah.
Because actually it makes it quite difficult to find a decent join.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll have more kind of finesse to it with a slightly thinner clay wall as well. Looks good though. You got the idea. It looks like the joins are working quite happily.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually quite, considering how big it is and heavy it is, it's quite strong.
Yeah. I've got a section here where there's quite a pronounced gap. So what I might need to do is make a little coil and stick that in there. So I'm just going to kind of open it up again with a bit of sgraffito. I've got a bit of offcut here that's, yeah, this is quite flexible. Not that flexible. A chunk in place. Great. I always think there's something quite male brain about this kind of way of working. I don't know whether that's true, but you seem to find more male artists attracted to system building techniques than female artists. I don't know whether that's a massive generalization and I should know better, or maybe it's just that art history reflects more the achievements of men than it does of women still, and that actually there's loads of female geometric abstract artists out there, but I don't. Mary Martin, I think, is the only one I can think of who's Cambridge linked, actually. Quite a lot of her work in the Fitzwilliam or in the Kettle's Yard.
What does she do?
Whereas she kind of does very mathematical paintings and sculptures, which have got kind of they're often kind of a series of geometric lines, but there's some kind of mathematical formula behind the placement of the lines and the length of the lines.
Right. And what about Bridgette Riley? Does she?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Bridgette Riley is a really good example of a woman that does it extremely well, and that is very, very influential. So yeah, no, you're right. Bridgette Riley is a perfect example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. But I guess often I think of her work as being quite, because she talks a lot about light. She's really fascinated by light and optical effects. So when you read her writing, which is really interesting, she's often talking about Seurat and the way that Seurat was inspired by the scientific writing of French scientists like Chevreul, who was writing about optical theory and color theory. She started off just kind of as a student copying Seurat's dots style to develop her own thing. But I think because her work has got really sumptuous color to it, it doesn't have the kind of rigor or difficulty that you get with some of the kind of the other abstract artists of the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's something very accessible about Bridgette Riley. I think she's great. I've probably seen more Bridgette Riley exhibitions than anybody else. And I've certainly had more headaches in Bridgette Riley exhibitions than anybody else. Because after an hour of it, you can't bear any more. There's a really good one that was held at the Hayward Gallery about 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah, there was one at Kettle's Yard about 5
years.
Yeah,
no, it was about 10 years ago, I think, actually, that one.
Probably.
But the great thing about the Hayward one was that it had, not only did it have quite a lot of her really early work that you generally don't see, it also had loads of her kind of prep work. And she basically does it all on graph paper and works out all of the angles and the repeats and the colors using kind of graph paper. And then when she's happy that she's got it sorted, she then gets it all scaled up. So it's really interesting to see the methods that she uses behind the scenes. I've never heard her talk, but apparently she's quite a tedious public speaker. A couple of people said, yeah, we really look forward to seeing Bridgette Riley, and God, she was boring. I don't think it's her thing at all. I don't think she likes doing it.
It is quite a skill.
Yeah, absolutely. To be a good public speaker you've got to be able to tell jokes in there as well. I think keep people amused.
This technique though does open up quite a lot of possibilities about what you can kind of build and.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the slab building allows you to control the clay moisture quite a lot, because you can basically pre-cut your slabs, and then you can put them between sheets of newspaper and dry them in all kinds of different ways to control the moisture level. And it can be quite flexible, so you can still, as I was saying, you can make slabs and then you can curl them to make curving wall sections, and they can be curving in 3 dimensions as well. So it's quite open-ended.
I think it's because making vases out of the coil thing is really, whereas this feels a bit more architectural in its.
Yeah.
Which kind of appeals to my sensibilities.
I thought it might. Yeah. No, it's good. I'm enjoying it. It does kind of create a logic of its own after a while, and you can kind of see where it could go, can't you?
Yeah.
I don't do TikTok, but I've started watching quite a lot of people on Instagram that do 30-second demos of clay work. And I've been teaching it for 10 years, and I would in no way say that I'm a potter. I don't have the training or the insight really. And I really struggle to get the finish on pots because I just don't have the time to put the effort in to really smooth things off.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see some of the techniques and the tricks, the kind of just simple tools that people make out of a piece of wood and a couple of nails, or a bent piece of metal bent into a U shape, and then with a piece of wire cut through it so that they can cut through and make a great long thing and then cut it in half. Somebody made it to be a big solid cylinder of clay that was just kind of buff clay, and they cut this thing in half through the middle, so they had a kind of a U-shaped cutting tool, cheese wire, but it meant that they could cut the thing about a foot into the length of it. And the cylinder that they'd made was itself made of lots of little cylinders of clay, and each one was like a stick of rock with different colors running through it. Wow. And there was basically a tropical fish in the middle, surrounded by bubbles of, like, each bubble was a different marble with a different series of colors running through it. It was amazing.
I saw actually on Twitter, I've forgotten his name. He was in Superbad, and I think he wrote it. A few other films like Stone.
Oh, yeah.
He does his own pottery, and he had some on Twitter. It was like,
oh, right, Josh Rogan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other guy that is a famous English potter who's a comedian is Johnny Vegas.
Okay.
I once caught a late night showing of him. Basically, it's like one of his really early stand-up acts where he must have just kind of started to hit the big time, but he was like in Benidorm or somewhere. He was in this massive convention hall full of drunk English people, and it was like some kind of weird post Bernard Manning kind of comedy routine he was doing. So there's no naked women, but there's a lot of obscene jokes. And then halfway through, he just started throwing pots.
He's an amazing comic, actually.
Yeah,
really interesting. Like,
What do you make?
it's just like experimenting with putting slabs together. So I've just been like putting stuff.
Bookend.
Could be a bookend. That's what Jason.
Very nice.
yeah. Slab happy.
This is what Sophie's getting for Christmas: a pencil holder made out of slabs of clay.
Start them early.
I did tell her that one of my projects over Easter, I'm going to make an urn so that she can put my ashes in it.
Another one now. Hair.
Yeah, we all like nice.
No. The crows are on the roof trying to break in by the sound of it. Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to do a clay club thing next weekend. I might do. I'll see what people think.
Yeah.
It's the Easter weekend, but nobody's going anywhere, are they? So
No.
maybe people will like a break from the norm.
Do you fancy a dog walk on Wednesday morning, Jason?
Just gonna.
Okay, so I've been doing this for about an hour and a half now. So I just want to show you the finished thing as such as I can. There's a couple of points here where it's quite weak, and that I need to rejoin that side. So if I'm resting it on that point or that point, these bits can't really take, because all the weight is on one point. It's putting a lot of pressure on that join and it's snapping the join. So I'm going to need to keep an eye on that as it dries. Sometimes as the clay dries, as I just said to the people that are here, if you're working with slabs of clay and you've curved them, which you can do, it will try and dry out and flatten out. So it has a tendency to want to lay in the way that it was cut, which you've got to be a bit careful about. But when you're doing slabs with flat pieces like this, generally it will sit quite happily until it dries. And as it dries, it loses its plasticity and its ability to take shock, and it becomes brittle. And that's where you've got to be more careful about handling it and picking it up in several places. It's not bad. I'm quite pleased with that. There are lots of bits that I need to brush off, but I'm going to have a rest and stop. So I might just do that with a little sponge, or I might take a little bit of moist clay and just fill in some of the little fingernail marks that I've missed. There's a little dent in the bottom of there that you could probably just about make out. I might just try and dig that out as well. It's just dissatisfying little mark. There we go. And here, equally, that's maybe a bit too much of a join line there. So there's kind of, there's bits that I can improve. And sometimes you might want to improve it by using sandpaper or abrasive paper. And you can do that after it's been fired. You'd want to do it outside, so you don't want to breathe in the particles. I don't imagine ceramic dust is very good for your lungs, but I honestly don't know. So there's still lots of ways you can work it. And the other thing that I might not have mentioned on recording, which I've done a little bit of, is a couple of places like this line here. There's a little gap, which I think you can just about see. Yeah. So what I can do is I can make a little very thin coil of clay and just with slip put that into there and then smooth it in to get rid of that. I could just probably get away with actually just pressing in some of the slip into that join and then smoothing out the sides of it. But I could, as I was saying, just press in a really thin coil of clay in there. And look, if I smooth it quite hard, I'm holding it on the back of my thumb. If I smooth it quite hard, I can actually spread that coil out so it almost disappears along the line of the join, and then I can just about take it out completely so that you can't see it. There's a slight bit in the corner there that I need to sort out. But there you go, that's my thing. It's an architectural form for sure. I'm thinking it's slightly modernist and slightly Aztec at the same time, so it's got its contemporary and its ancient kind of aspects going on, and it will sit on various surfaces. The points it could sit on, but it won't take the weight very well at the moment, so I need to let it get fired and then it will take the weight quite happily. Equally, it sat quite nicely on its back like that originally, sticking up in the air. So it's an object for contemplation, I think. An object without function, which makes it a pure piece of sculpture. It's got no possible use whatsoever apart from to make you think. I suppose I could keep my keys in there. Give it a practical function. There we go. All right. So I'm going to stop recording there. I'd be interested to see what people make of this technique. And I'd really like to see if you share them. So, ta-ta from me. Goodbye.